Good evening, I'm Judy Woodruff on the NewsHour tonight.
When we declare our schools to be gun-free zones, it just puts our students in far more danger.
President Trump keeps up the argument for arming teachers as Florida's Republican governor breaks with the NRA by calling for raising to 21 the age to buy a gun. Then a guilty plea. A former top Trump campaign aide admits to conspiracy and false statements. And it's Friday. David Brooks and Ruth Marcus are here to analyze this moment in the gun debate and the latest in the Russia probe. Plus, a new drama explores the events leading up to the September 11th attacks and the lessons we might learn as a nation today.
The theme of this season is divided we fail. And we were divided, and we failed to stop 9/11. But I think, the country's never been more divided than it is right now.
All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour. The debate over guns, school safety, and mass shootings took a turn today as the president pushed again for arming teachers. But in Florida, its Republican governor, Rick Scott, broke with the president and with the NRA over that and some other measures. William Brangham has our report.
It's time to make our schools a much harder target for attackers.
The president insisted again today that arming teachers would help stop mass shootings. Even though many education groups say more guns in schools is a bad idea, in his speech before the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, President Trump reiterated his support.
I don't want a person that's never handled a gun, that wouldn't know what a gun looks like, to be armed. The teachers and the coaches and other people in the building, the dean, the assistant dean, the principal, they love their people. They want to protect these kids. And I think we're better with that. It's not all of them, but you would have a lot. So this crazy man who walked in wouldn't even know who it is that has it. That's good. It's not bad, that's good. And a teacher would have shot the hell out of him before he knew what happened.
The president also repeated his call to strengthen background checks to keep seriously mentally ill people from buying guns. For the record, the president signed a law last year that many say does just the opposite. And the president called out the armed Florida deputy stationed at the school who stayed outside during the attack.
The deputy who didn't go into the school because he didn't want to go into the school, okay? He was tested under fire, and that wasn't a good result.
We're not going to disclose the video at this time.
Last night, Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel said video showed that deputy, Scott Peterson, seen here in archival video, rushed to the west side of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Peterson heard gunshots inside, but instead of entering, he waited outside for at least 4 minutes as the shooting continued. The attack lasted roughly 6 minutes. Deputy Peterson was suspended without pay and has since resigned.
What matters is that when we in law enforcement arrive at an active shooter, we go in and address the target. And that's what should have been done. There are no words. I mean, these families lost their children. We lost coaches. I've been to the funerals. I've been to the homes where they sit and shiver. I've been to the vigils.
There were other revelations of missed opportunities overnight. Since 2008, the sheriff's office had received 23 calls related to the suspected shooter or his brother. Among them, a warning about an Instagram post of himself with guns threatening to shoot up a school. And last year, a caller reported the suspect was collecting weapons and could be, quote, a school shooter in the making. Officials also said surveillance footage of the school during the shooting was not shown live to other police, meaning they were watching 20-minute-old video while they were responding and mistakenly believed the alleged shooter was still inside. For his part, Florida's Republican Governor Rick Scott announced new proposals for gun control for his state, going further than he has before.
Today, I'm announcing a major action plan.
They include banning the sale of any firearms to people younger than 21. Until now in Florida, that only applied to handguns. Scott also called for placing one armed trained officer for every 1,000 students at public schools starting next fall. And he called for banning bump stocks.
The goal of this plan of action is to make massive changes in protecting our schools, provide significantly more resources for mental health, and to do everything we can to keep guns out of the hands of those dealing with mental problems or threatening harms to themselves or others.
Some of those proposals were a notable break with the NRA, and Scott said he disagreed with the president when it comes to the idea of arming teachers. Meanwhile, police officers and first responders from the scene gathered today to tell their harrowing stories. Sergeant Jeff Heinrich broke down while recounting how, after he relayed a description of the shooter to police, he located his own children inside the school.
And by the grace of God, my wife and my son, who are on opposite ends of the school, my son was out on a bathroom pass, and my wife was in planning inside the girls' locker room. And they both heard the fire alarm and decided to evacuate. By the grace of God, when they walked out in the hallway, they found each other.
Teachers arrived today at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High for the first time since the shooting. It's slated to officially reopen and resume classes next Tuesday. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham.
There were new details today about a tipster's call to the FBI a little more than a month before the Florida attack. A woman who knew the alleged shooter claimed that he had an arsenal of weapons and that she was worried he might be, quote, getting into a school and just shooting the place up. She added, "I know he's going to explode." The woman also told the FBI that he had threatened his mother with a rifle before she later died of other causes. Details of the call were reported by the Wall Street Journal and by the New York Times. And we'll have more on mental health issues being debated right after the news summary. In the day's other news, the Trump administration announced its toughest sanctions yet on North Korea in its latest effort to crack down on the country's illegal maritime trade. These target one individual, 27 entities, and 28 vessels that the U.S. says North Korea is using to evade international law. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said the economic sanctions will have a serious impact.
Our actions are part of the ongoing maximum economic pressure campaign to cut off sources of revenue that this regime derives from UN and U.S. prohibitive trade to fund its nuclear and ballistic missile programs.
Mnuchin said the U.S. has imposed a total of more than 450 sanctions against North Korea, half of them in the past year alone. President Trump said today that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner's security clearance is in the hands of the White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, and he said he has no doubt that he will make the right choice. Kushner has been working as a senior advisor to the president on an interim clearance for over a year. Kelly had said that he would decide whether Kushner can keep that clearance by today. In Syria, a week of regime airstrikes on rebel-held suburbs east of Damascus have now left more than 460 people dead. Rescuers frantically pulled the injured from the rubble as Syrian regime warplanes pounded the region for a sixth day. A spokeswoman for the United Nations envoy to Syria called for a ceasefire as members of the UN Security Council struggle to agree on the terms.
That the humanitarian situation of the civilians in eastern Ghouta is appalling, and therefore we are in urgent need for a ceasefire that stops both the horrific heavy bombardment of eastern Ghouta and the indiscriminate mortar shelling on Damascus.
The UN Security Council then delayed a vote on the Syrian ceasefire until tomorrow afternoon. There's more trouble in Myanmar as human rights groups say the government has razed at least 55 former Rohingya villages. These satellite images show some of the bulldozed villages which had been set on fire after hundreds of thousands of the Rohingya Muslim minority were forced from their homes in August. Human Rights Watch warned that Myanmar could be trying to destroy evidence of atrocities. The U.S. Embassy in Israel will officially move to Jerusalem this May, in a timing that coincides with Israel's 70th anniversary. That is earlier than expected. For the move, President Trump announced last December. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu lauded the announcement, but a spokesperson for Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas called it, quote, an unacceptable step that will be an obstacle to any effort to create peace in the region. President Trump's son did not give the foreign policy speech he was scheduled to deliver today while promoting Trump-branded properties in India. Donald Trump Jr., who helps to run the family's real estate business, had faced a wave of criticism for mixing private business interests with U.S. foreign policy. Instead, he participated in a question and answer session at a summit in New Delhi and lamented his father's promise that the company won't take on any new deals while he's in office.
It is a big sacrifice because a big part of my life to say, hey, I'm going to take 8 years. I'm 40. Let's call it 23% of my life, and just we're not going to do anything. It is difficult and it's tough as a businessman, but again, fully understandable in time when we're out of politics. I think we'll get some credit for it and we'll be welcomed again with open arms.
Donald Trump Jr. insisted that claims that he's using his father's presidency to sell luxury apartments are, quote, nonsense. A woman is in custody after striking a security barrier near the White House late this afternoon. The driver rammed the barrier with her white van, but did not breach it. The White House was temporarily put on lockdown. The Secret Service said that she was immediately apprehended and that no injuries were reported. In West Virginia, all the public schools were closed for a second day amid a statewide teachers' strike. Thousands of educators joined the picket lines to demand better pay and benefits for teachers who are among the lowest paid in the country. They have been demonstrating in all 55 counties since yesterday, even though such strikes are illegal there.
I have a son who is in college. I have a daughter who will be in college next year, and they will not stay in this state. So it's about our students and staying here. We have to make sure that we have something to offer them, and we don't right now.
West Virginia's Republican Governor Jim Justice approved a 2% pay raise for teachers this year, but the educators insist that is still not enough. Stocks soared on Wall Street today, boosted by gains in the technology and banking sectors. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rallied more than 347 points to close at just under 25,310. The Nasdaq rose 127 points, and the S&P 500 added 43. For the week, both the Dow and the S&P 500 rose a fraction of a percent. The Nasdaq gained more than 1%. And at the Winter Olympics, Russia won its first gold medal of the Games. It went to 15-year-old figure skater Alina Zagitova in the women's free skate. Her teammate Evgenia Medvedeva took silver. Separately, a second Russian athlete at the Games, a female bobsledder, has now tested positive for doping. Still to come on the NewsHour, we examine some of the proposals to prevent a mass shooting. A former Trump campaign aide pleads guilty and plans to cooperate in the Russia investigation. David Brooks and Ruth Marcus give their take on the national gun debate and much more. In the aftermath of the school shooting in Florida, there has been discussion about a number of ways to prevent a repeat of these tragedies, from arming teachers to stricter gun laws and addressing people with mental and emotional problems. But preventing violence by using mental health records is more complicated than many realize. For example, posting a disturbing message on social media does not necessarily mean an individual has a mental health concern. And someone treated and diagnosed for a specific illness may never turn up in the federal background check system. To help us lay this out and look at some of the challenges, I'm joined by Dr. Jeffrey Swanson. He's a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Duke University. Professor Swanson, thank you for joining us again on the NewsHour. I want to clarify something going in. You were just reminding us that the vast majority of people who have mental and emotional challenges don't turn out to be violent. Is that right?
That's right, Judy. There are probably over 40 million people in the United States who would meet criteria for a diagnosable mental health condition, 10 million with a serious disorder such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or major depression, and the overwhelming majority of them are not violent towards other people and never will be.
So right now, just tell us generally, what do the laws say about preventing somebody from, banning somebody from getting a gun if they have some kind of mental or emotional problem?
Right, well, the federal law goes back to the 1968 Gun Control Act. Basically, the law identified a couple of categories of people who would be prohibited from purchasing or possessing firearms. Most importantly, people with a felony criminal conviction. But with respect to people with mental health records, it's really about an adjudication. So people who have been involuntarily committed to a mental hospital, people who've been found in a court to be incompetent to manage their own affairs and have a mental illness, people who, on the criminal side, have been found not guilty by reason of insanity or incompetent to stand trial. So there's been a legal determination, and most of those categories have something to do with dangerousness, and there's also been some due process, which actually is important when you think about the fact that people are going to be deprived of a constitutional right.
So given that, what has to happen for there to be information in the National Criminal Background Check System on someone?
So the information in the National Instant Criminal Background Check System is reported by states typically, and the background check as regulated by the Brady Law is only as good as the information that's there. So sometimes the state courts report the information, sometimes it comes from a mental health authority in the state. There are records of involuntary commitment that are submitted, and but a lot of people might not be reported even though they have been involuntarily detained and evaluated during a mental health crisis, because they're only there for a short period of time, say 72 hours. After that, they may sign into the hospital voluntarily if they're able to do that and willing, or they may be discharged. And if it doesn't progress to a gun disqualifying involuntary commitment hearing with a judge and the opportunity for the person to be represented by counsel, then that record is not going to be in the National Instant Check System. I think as a result, the records that are there, they're kind of spotty, and also when we look at the criteria, they're probably too narrow and too broad at the same time. There are lots of people who've been involuntarily committed who are not violent towards others or themselves, and there are lots of people who actually do pose a risk. Maybe they're just really angry, disturbed people and are never going to have a gun disqualifying involuntary commitment record, or maybe not even a felony conviction.
So is there a better way? I mean, I know mental health professionals like you talk about this, look at this, research this all the time. Is there a better way? Are there things that could be done to catch more of these people who could be potentially dangerous?
Well, I think so. If you wanted to focus first on that point of sale, when people come in to purchase a firearm from a federally licensed dealer, we could have better criteria. We could, for example, do as about half the states do and say, let's restrict firearms, at least temporarily, from people who've been detained in a short-term involuntary hold. We could say, let's prohibit people who have a misdemeanor violent crime conviction, because we know that violence escalates, and today's fist and black eye could become tomorrow's gun and dead body. But we could also say, look at all the people out there who already have a number of firearms and don't have a disqualifying record. And so what if we put into the hands of police officers the clear legal authority to intervene upstream and remove firearms from people where there's clear evidence that they pose a risk, and also allow family members to initiate that process if they know someone is at risk, and often they have that information very specifically about people. Give them an avenue to remove the firearms, at least for a period of time. And And I think that's a solution that is getting some traction. It's called extreme risk protection orders or gun violence restraining orders. In Connecticut, the pioneering state called it a risk warrant law. I think that is another solution because it doesn't require that the person have this record, and it also solves the problem that if you just stop someone from buying a new gun and they already have 10 or 12 or 15 at home, it might not deter them.
But you are suggesting clearly that a number of these methods have been tried, and they're not passing. They don't gain the support that they need in so many states.
Well, that's right. For one thing, the number of states that have enacted a risk warrant law is very small, and until recently, just a couple of states. But also, as with any public health law or policy, you need to do more than just passing the law. There has to be a very systematic effort to implement it and to make sure the people who are in a position to use it, the actors around it, actually know about it, whether it's law enforcement or others. And so I think that's an important part of the message as well.
And do I hear you saying, Jeff Swanson, that what is needed is action at the federal level, that it really isn't enough to have some states pass these kinds of regulations?
I think the federal and the state laws can work together. For example, there are a lot of state-level measures that would work better if we had comprehensive background checks required at the federal level, so that if you stop someone with a good state law, they can't just go next door to a neighboring state with weaker gun laws and maybe doesn't have a requirement for a background check. I think the answer is both, but even federal measures often have to be implemented at the state level, and the restriction with respect to involuntary commitment is a good example. That's a federal law, but commitment statutes and practices vary a lot from state to state. Some states use it a great deal and others don't. So the chance that the same person with the same mental health crisis will be prohibited may depend on what state they're living in. So I think we need to have a comprehensive solution, but also an on-the-ground state-level implementation.
Well, it is no question, this is complicated, but it is also clear that progress has been made, and there's some impetus now to be trying to make more progress as we go forward. Professor Jeff Swanson at Duke University, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 election has again swept up a former member of the Trump campaign. Hari Srinivasan lays out the latest.
For Rick Gates, this day in court was different. He was in Washington entering the latest guilty plea, the fifth so far in the investigation led by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Gates is a former Trump campaign aide and a longtime associate of Paul Manafort, the former Trump campaign chairman. Today's plea is the result of a deal that Gates cut with Mueller's office. As part of the agreement, he admitted that he lied to investigators earlier this month and that he conspired with others to conceal, among other things, his and Manafort's unregistered foreign lobbying. Legal pressure on the two has been mounting of late. Gates and Manafort were indicted last October on 12 counts, including a count related to money laundering. But just yesterday, a federal grand jury in Virginia piled on a separate indictment against the two, listing 32 total counts, including charges relating to false income tax returns and bank fraud. That said, none of the charges against Gates or Manafort so far explicitly deal with Russia's meddling in the 2016 election. In a statement this afternoon, Manafort said that even with Gates's plea, quote, "I continue to maintain my innocence." Meanwhile, at the White House today, President Trump did not address news of the plea. Mueller did secure an indictment related to Russia's interference last Friday against a Russian organization called the Internet Research Agency, based in St. Petersburg. And he secured two other guilty pleas in the past week, including one from an attorney, Alex Vanderswan, who admitted to lying to investigators. Former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and former Trump Foreign Policy Advisor George Papadopoulos entered guilty pleas of their own last year. We explore what today's plea agreement means for the special counsel's investigation with our own Lisa Desjardins and Carrie Johnson, justice correspondent for NPR. Lisa, Paul Manafort continues to maintain that he is innocent and he's going to defend himself. Why did Rick Gates plead guilty?
Well, talking to those close to this investigation, Gates is a father of 4, this is well known, and he essentially felt that with the new charges coming, that a trial was going to be too costly and that his chances of success were not clear. There were a tremendous amount of very serious charges with what seemed to be a lot of evidence in the latest indictments against Gates. What's more, Hari, is a source close to the investigation tells me that Gates's team is hoping for no jail time because of this deal. That ultimately will be up to the judge in this case, but they expect a prosecutor to make that recommendation. And now, as a result, he is offering to be a cooperative witness. That has very important implications for the rest of this investigation.
Carrie Johnson, the prospect of no jail time certainly seems to be a big lure, but what was the evidence that was stacked against him? What's in these indictments?
There's a lot of evidence, Hari, from paperwork with respect to bank fraud allegations and IRS allegations that both Rick Gates and Paul Manafort failed to report more than $70 million in foreign income they funneled through offshore accounts. There are allegations that they misled or doctored reports that went to accountants and other financial professionals. There are emails and there are conversations with others allegedly involved in this scheme. So there was a mounting pile of evidence against both of these men. Rick Gates does face about 8 years in prison, but prosecutors have reserved the right to ask the judge for leniency if he's super cooperative, and he certainly hopes to be super cooperative against Paul Manafort and maybe other people. It's yet to come.
You know, Lisa and Carrie, it's a question for you both. Lisa, let me turn to you first. The president and the White House have repeatedly said, you know, these charges have nothing to do with the campaign. This is maybe money laundering or something that happened before these individuals were involved.
Right. Let's talk about what is the end game here. The charges against Gates, you're absolutely right, have to deal right now with Paul Manafort. The charges against Manafort only have to do with financial dealings, nothing to do with the Trump campaign. So there are two possibilities, Hari, I think. One is that this prosecutor hopes to put pressure on Manafort by building this case, including Gates, who would be no better witness against Manafort, and to get him to say something about the Trump campaign. Or the special prosecutor could think that Manafort himself is someone who colluded with Russia in his work with Ukraine, and perhaps Manafort is an end target. We don't know. We do know that Rick Gates stayed on with the Trump campaign after Paul Manafort left. He worked with the RNC as a liaison to the campaign, and he also worked on the inauguration. He continued to visit the White House all through last year, so he's someone who had contact with the White House for one of the longest period of times of those so far involved in the investigation.
Carrie Johnson?
Yeah, remember that the special counsel has also secured guilty pleas from George Papadopoulos, the foreign policy aide, who acknowledged meeting with Russians who offered some dirt about Hillary Clinton and told him that they had hacked her email accounts or email accounts of people close to Clinton. And remember that the special counsel has also secured a guilty plea from Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor. We don't know yet what those people have told this prosecution team about contacts with Russians, but certainly Rick Gates was involved in and met with some of these people and met with other subjects of the ongoing investigation. So he's going to be an important corroborating witness potentially for some of these other cooperators already in Robert Mueller's stable. And he may have access to emails, recordings, or other evidence that could be useful to the special counsel team. They're keeping that close to the vest for now.
Well, Lisa, there were reports late this afternoon questioning Jared Kushner's security clearances. Does this have anything to do? Is this a ripple effect of the investigation that we're seeing and we're talking about?
Well, there is a lot of speculation that the special counsel is looking closely into Kushner's financial dealings as well. We don't know if that's directly connected to this report. The report is from the Washington Post saying that 2 weeks ago, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein called the White House to let them know that Jared Kushner's application for security clearance would be delayed again because of some kind of further investigation. No specifics in this story, and we reached out to the Justice Department, Hari. They gave us a statement back and said that there was no specifics of investigation concern given to the White House. But that's not a denial of what the Washington Post is saying, which is that there's a delay for some reason, some investigation in Kushner's clearances.
Carrie Johnson, one of the things that the White House says fairly frequently is that this investigation will wrap up soon. It doesn't seem to be.
Not at all. In fact, if Paul Manafort continues on his current course, he's headed for a trial in Washington, D.C. this fall, maybe around the time of the midterms. And there's ongoing signals that the Mueller team is not yet done. They haven't yet been at this task for a year, Hari. We have, as you said, charges against 19 people, now 5 guilty pleas. No sign yet they are losing steam.
All right, Carrie Johnson, Justice correspondent for NPR, and our own Lisa Desjardins. Thank you both.
Now to the analysis of Brooks and Marcus. That is New York Times columnist David Brooks and Washington Post deputy editorial page editor Ruth Marcus. Mark Shields is away. And welcome to both of you on this Friday night. Let's pick up, I guess, where we left off, David, listening to that last conversation about the Mueller investigation. There have been a flurry of indictments, some guilty pleas. What does it all add up to right now?
I really have no idea. You know, we don't know. Gates is an interesting story because he did have access to the administration during the crucial period of the transition and during the campaign. And does he have some witnessing of collusion? I guess that's the million-dollar question. I remain a skeptic about that, just because I think they're too incompetent to have colluded. But it could be. But the other interesting thing to me is how big this investigation is. 19 people brought charges on. And so where does that go when they hit Donald Trump? Do they stay with Russia? Do they go to some of the broader financial issues that have been alleged with Deutsche Bank? To me, just the scope of the investigation is interesting because where it could go and for the increasing pressure it puts on the Trump psychology, because he seems to never be able to get out of feeling that pressure just coming down upon him.
What do you think it all
But truer words were never spoken about the Trump psychology. I mean, we saw it emerge over the weekend with the indictments you were talking about last Friday night, not central to the Trump campaign, but involving the Russian interference, and he could not leave that alone, needed to blame it on his predecessor, needed to say that it showed no collusion, that they concluded no collusion when they hadn't. This latest set of indictments and guilty pleas with Manafort and Gates, I find extremely tantalizing because I'm not quite as convinced as you are on the no collusion front. It sort of depends on the meaning of collusion, because what we know from these indictments is that these were people who were working very closely with Russian interests. At the time they were working with the campaign, they felt themselves, it's incredible to anybody who reads about the amount of money they were making, but they were in financial straits. They needed money to support their incredibly lavish lifestyles. Manafort and Gates. And so we know things happened. We know there were contacts with Russians. We know that that there were changes in the platform regarding Ukraine. Was there collusion that might have fallen short of President Trump? I don't know, but I know that there is like this submarine of the Mueller investigation that just keeps plowing forward. We don't see where it's going until it decides to surface.
How much, David, is it affecting what the president's able to do? I mean, he brings it up, he tweets about it, he brings up Obama, blames him for not pursuing this investigation.
I should say I'm not convinced of anything. I really don't know. But it's clearly having an intense psychological effect on the administration, as it does even on a normal administration. Under an investigation, you don't know who's about to turn. You don't know which conversation you had months ago is about to get you into trouble. You're thinking about hiring lawyers. There's an administration that's already not a happy place to live. It just ratchets up that pressure. And that's a normal administration. An administration where a man is at the top who's, I'm trying to think of polite words, volatile in the face of pressure, I think it makes it extremely miserable to be there.
And Ruth, the story that came out in your newspaper late this afternoon about the security clearance, the president's son-in-law, he's been in office over a year. There still is no security clearance for Jared Kushner.
He's been in office over a year, and he has had access throughout that time, according to my newspaper, to the most sensitive information available, the president's daily briefing, which would require the highest level of security clearance. This is another one of those, it's hard to precisely know from the outside what it is that's holding this up. We do know that he has repeatedly had to amend his disclosure forms and come up with more meetings that he hadn't remembered previously. But to me, this just underlines the degree to which basically Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump have no business being in the White House. It is a bad idea. They brought no special expertise. All they brought to it was their personal relationship with the president. And it's no other person. It's hard. Well, we did have Rob Porter with his security clearance going on, but it's hard to imagine another individual with this level of problems with security clearance being allowed to stay there for so long. And my guess is that his problems with obtaining a security clearance and having to keep that interim status kind of skewed the decision-making for others, because how can you question others' interim status if Jared Kushner is allowed to keep his?
Well, meantime, what this story was pushed aside by was the terrible tragedy of last week, David. It's now been, over a week since the Florida school shooting. Emotions are still running high. What do you make at this point of the reaction from our political leadership and frankly, of the students who've been so outspoken?
So to me, the question is, what kind of pressure leads to change? We've seen from the students much more pressure and from the country than in any of the previous shootings. So will the boiling bit of rage and outrage and the passion, will that bowl legislators over and lead to some sort of change? It could be. We're just in uncharted territory. I remain skeptical. Since Sandy Hook, we've had more than 24 states have passed gun legislation. And in almost every single case, it's been to make access to guns easier, not harder. And now why is that? First, why? And because imposing restrictions is super popular. 70% support some kind of restriction. That's because most of the legislatures are held by Republicans. And the second reason is gun issue is not about guns. It's become sort of a proxy in a culture war. And a lot of people who are on the gun side feel this isn't really about guns. It's the elitists who want to crush our culture. And so they put a wall down and say no compromise at all. And so to me, the way to move forward is let's depressurize this. And let's say, we're not trying to take your guns, we just want a few things. And that way you can separate a lot of Republicans from the NRA and actually get some concrete things done. But instead we're seeing the exact opposite. We're seeing a rising of passion, a rising of rage, and sort of a national frenzy on both sides over this, which to me makes it much, much less likely we're going to get some progress.
But Ruth, this passion, this rage is very real on the part of these students and others.
It's very real. It's very powerful. It will be very interesting to see the difference that it could make. I shared David's skepticism on that in part because I remember sitting with the Sandy Hook moms and thinking that there could be no more powerful story. I sat with them a day before they failed to get the votes to stop the filibuster of a very mild measure to close the gun show background check loophole. They were not able to do that. I love these students. I'm so impressed by them. If those moms couldn't do it and the grieving dads, I'm not sure that these students can. On the other hand, I need to take issue with something that you said, David, which is I agree with you that turning this into a culture war and letting people yell that we're going to be taking their guns, people are trying to take their guns is a bad idea. That is not what has been happening in the gun debate over the last 10 years. What's been happening is an effort to do very minor things like closing the background check loophole, like reinstating the assault weapons ban, like even these bump stocks that we weren't able to do after the last Las Vegas shooting. And the thing that's so frustrating and infuriating is that in our political system, even that has been very difficult to do.
Yeah.
What about that?
Well, I would say, first of all, there's a long history to this debate. The NRA did a horrible thing by turning into an absolutist position. They started the culture war. And then I think there has been a series of attacks, sometimes unheard by the people who are making them, but deeply heard, certainly on my Twitter feed, by people who think they're just out to get us. So take, for example, the CNN town hall. I was just following it on Twitter because I didn't have access to a TV. There were two moments when the right side of my Twitter feed totally exploded. The first was when Marco Rubio was accused of being like a mass killer. And people thought that was outrageous on one side. The second, where Rubio said it's not like we want to take away all our guns, and the crowd applauded at that moment. And one of the valuable arguments that those of us who want to control guns have made is, no, we don't want to take all our guns. We just don't want to do these few practical things. And then the right side of my Twitter feeds took a look at that applause and said, see, they're lying. They want to take all our guns away. And I saw, you could see the walls shutting down and any chance of reasonable dates shutting down. And I don't mean to say the attacks and the over-the-top passion is all on the left. That's certainly not the case. But it has become a very roiling culture war in a way that I don't think is just healthy for an argument where 70% of the country's on one side.
But at some point, the passion will subside a little, Ruth. Will there be the will to get something done? Yes, there's going to be some passion that's going to continue. These young people are saying, we are sticking with this.
Well, I think the interesting thing has been that the passion, in terms of passion translating into political power, which is at the voting booth, the passion on this debate for many years has been on the right, on the pro-gun side. The question is whether we are now seeing an emergence, and maybe fueled by younger voters, maybe fueled by first-time voters, of an equivalent passion on the left, because as much as the gun control side talks about the economic power of the National Rifle Association and urges people to stop taking their donations, it's not the economic power, it's the mobilization power. They need equal mobilization on the other side. Maybe this is the time.
And we haven't, and Ruth's right, David, I mean, we haven't seen that. The passion has mainly been on the right.
Yeah, I've been talking to college students this week, and I asked them about how they see their generation. And a couple of students were trying to define their generation. And they said, you know, we're the school shooting generation. And that struck me as interesting. So if it's become so a large part of their consciousness, maybe it does rise to the level that people who are on the more controlling side will vote on it. It has not been the case really so far.
That's pretty awful, isn't it, to think that these young people think they're the school shooter.
They are. I mean, the numbers tell us that they're right. And I have to sort of segue here, if you don't mind, into President Trump's idea to solve this problem by arming teachers. When Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association said this in the aftermath of Sandy Hook, it was treated as NRA lunacy. Now we're getting this same, and I'm sorry, it's a lunatic idea from the President of the United States. There could not be a worse idea for stopping another generation of the school shooting generation.
A thought on arming teachers?
Totally agree. It's a demented idea. I mean, aside from everything else, the dangers of it, just think how it changes the student-teacher relationship to see them packing a gun. I mean, it's truly demented. There are a lot of good ideas that have surfaced. Raising the minimum wage, putting some more control.
But, you said wage.
Oh,
that too.
I'm really turning left.
We know what you meant.
I'm so left-wing. I'm going to minimum wage. Yeah, but so there are a lot of good ideas that have come up. That's the opposite of one.
Well, they're talking about it, so we'll see. David Brooks, Ruth Marcus, thank you both. A new TV drama that starts next week takes viewers back to the events that led to the attacks of September 11th, 2001. It looks at how U.S. intelligence services might have stopped them from happening. And as Jeffrey Brown tells us, the lessons its creators say it offers for the current time.
The looming tower dramatizes the true story of the hunt for Osama bin Laden in the years leading up to the attacks on September 11th. How the FBI and CIA were each attempting to track his movements and plans, and yet at critical junctures withheld information from one another.
You got a stash of intel that you refused to share with my agents.
Jeff Daniels plays John O'Neill, the real-life, hard-living FBI agent who early on recognized al-Qaeda's threat, but felt stymied by the CIA's refusal to share what it knew.
How would you know if it was a law enforcement matter or a foreign intelligence matter if you haven't looked at the hard drive?
It's the bull in the china shop, you know, that kind of approach to life, gulping life, and all of that. I'd never done that, never been asked to do it. I had to go to work to figure out how to do it, which is what I need now.
If we did have any intelligence whatsoever, it would be for us to decide how best to use it before you do what you always do, go around the globe arresting people and putting them on trial.
Peter Sarsgaard plays his counterpart in the CIA, a composite character who fears the FBI will compromise his agency's hard-earned intelligence.
What did you come to feel was the key to
Well,
playing
you
this
know,
character?
feeling like the smartest person in the room, you know, feeling like no one can really understand things like you can understand things. You know, I'm playing an incredibly intelligent guy, a guy who knows a lot and is myopic because of it.
It is astounding and horrifying to watch. I mean, as a citizen, the two of you and your characters so hating each other, so against each other, so unwilling to share.
Or both thinking we're right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I think that's a lot of it,
Yeah.
you know.
I'm not moving. Neither is he.
No.
Here's to losing. You practice?
Islam? Not in a long time. You?
Church and me broke up a lifetime ago. Talk to me about the interview.
The question was, how do you take such a vast tragedy and make it human?
The series is based on the 2006 book of the same name written by Lawrence Wright, a New Yorker magazine staff writer, playwright, and screenwriter. It earned him the Pulitzer Prize for nonfiction.
The way that I do those kinds of stories is to try to find individual stories. I call them donkeys. The idea is, it sounds like a derogatory term, but a donkey is a beast of burden who can carry a lot of information on his back and can take the reader or the viewer into a world they don't understand.
The series opens just before al-Qaeda's attacks on the U.S. Embassy in Kenya in 1998. That's about halfway into Wright's book, A Fuller History of al-Qaeda's Ideology and Key Members.
How many Arabic speakers do we have in the Bureau?
Wright interviewed hundreds of people, including Ali Soufan.
8? 8, thank you. 8 Arabic speakers out of more than 10,000 agents. That's how seriously our government takes this threat.
Sorry, boss. Shuttle was late.
Kiss the ring.
Then a young Lebanese-American FBI agent who during the hunt was one of the very few Arabic speakers working in the Bureau.
Who's this? It's your newest colleague, Ali Soufan. He can answer every question you have.
In the show, he's played by French-Algerian actor Tahar Rahim.
You know what? It's a dramatization.
Soufan has since retired from the FBI and worked as a consultant on the series.
So I think what the show is trying to do is take, 10 years worth of information and try to convey in one episode, in one scene, to the audience, to the person who's sitting in their living room watching, to convey the feelings, to convey what was going on and how it accumulated over the years. And I think you need dramatization to do that.
Our office knows more about al-Qaeda than anybody.
But 17 years after the attacks, why revisit this story now? One reason, says Wright, is that television has changed for the better.
Stop telling me to calm down. There are bombs going off around the world. That doesn't make me feel calm.
I felt like it was probably the most precious thing I'd ever done. And I was jealous of it, and I didn't want it to be handled poorly. But the other thing that happened in the interim between 9/11 and today is television changed.
We rendition him anywhere we like.
Egypt, perhaps.
And there's another reason, say Wright and Soufan.
You know, the theme of this season is divided we fail. And we were divided, and we failed to stop 9/11. But I think, the country's never been more divided than it is right now. And, we are our own worst enemy. And this business of attacking the intelligence agencies for partisan reasons increases that kind of division. And it makes us less effective and less safe.
Where were you born?
Lebanon, sir.
Beverly, would you get me Louis Free on his cell phone?
As the FBI is being attacked, as the intelligence community is being attacked, we need to actually humanize these agencies. They are made of humans who are great patriots, who took an oath to defend the country against all enemy, domestic and foreign. And basically, their oath is to the Constitution, not to a politician. And that's why they are being attacked. And I hope the American people will realize the sacrifices that people in the intelligence community and the FBI, they do every day when they watch this show.
The Looming Tower debuts on Hulu February 28th. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown.
You've heard them all. Wear your seatbelt, don't smoke, don't drink and drive. These are all pieces of advice that we're accustomed to hearing, but they become second nature only because of effective public health campaigns. It takes time and persuasion to change behavior. Tonight, pediatrician Nadine Burke Harris shares her humble opinion on what she sees as a grave threat to many children, one she believes has been misdiagnosed and overlooked.
10 years ago, at my pediatric clinic in San Francisco, teachers, social workers, and parents were bringing me child after child with concerns of ADHD. As I examined my patients, I noticed that the highest rate of behavioral problems was occurring in the kids whose parents had drug addictions or mental illness, or those who were subject to violence at home. When I dug into the science, what I found was that for most of these kids, the problem wasn't run-of-the-mill ADHD. For most of my kids, the real problem was what the American Academy of Pediatrics now recognizes as toxic stress. Ultimately, it all boils down to our fight or flight response, what happens in our bodies when we experience something scary. But when activated too often, like with repeated abuse or neglect or parental addiction, it can change the structure and function of children's developing brains. It can affect their hormones, the immune system, even the way DNA is read and transcribed. And it dramatically increases the risk of both behavioral and health problems in childhood and adulthood. Toxic stress affects white kids, black and brown kids, rich, poor, urban, rural. In other words, it can affect anyone and it can happen anywhere. But right now, only 4% of pediatricians in the US are screening for toxic stress. Most haven't received any training on how to identify kids who are at risk. This has to change. Too many children with behavioral symptoms of toxic stress are being labeled with ADHD and given stimulants without any identification of the root cause. And many kids show no behavioral symptoms at all, yet they are still more than twice as likely to go on to develop asthma, autoimmune disease, heart disease, and cancer. And their life expectancy can be cut short by decades. More than 34 million American children have had at least one adverse childhood experience, like witnessing violence at home or being sexually molested. We need every medical professional in this country to be equipped with the right tools for universal screening. When identified early, doctors, educators, and caregivers can help reverse the biological effects of childhood trauma. Together, we can give every child a shot at a healthy life.
Important advice from Nadine Burke Harris. Now, Robert Costa is preparing for Washington Week, which airs later tonight. Robert, what are you planning?
We'll discuss the uniquely American problem of school shootings and how the national dialogue about gun violence may be shifting following that Florida rampage. That's later tonight on Washington Week. Judy?
And we will be watching. Tomorrow on PBS NewsHour Weekend, some Muslim women around the world dare to say, "Me too." And that's the NewsHour for tonight. But before we go, we want to say good luck to Ed Lee. He has been an essential figure behind the camera for the NewsHour for more than 30 years. He begins his retirement after tonight's show. Ed, we are going to miss you big time. I'm Judy Woodruff. Have a great weekend. Thank you and good night.
You're watching PBS.